Introduction to the Russian Empire and its expansion. The Russian Empire, one of the largest in history, spanned vast regions of Europe, Asia, and even North America at its height. Its expansion over several centuries shaped the political, economic, and cultural landscapes of the regions it controlled, leaving a complex and often controversial legacy. The empire's growth was a result of various factors, including military conquest, strategic alliances, and the desire for economic resources. The geopolitical motivations behind Russia's expansion were multifaceted and intertwined with the empire's need for security, prestige, and global influence. 1. Overview of the Russian Empire's growth. Origins and early expansion, pre-1721. The history of Russian expansion begins long before the formal establishment of the Russian Empire. The foundations of the Russian state can be traced back to the Kievan Rus, a loose federation of Slavic tribes that flourished from the 9th to the 13th centuries. This early state, although short-lived due to Mongol invasions, laid the groundwork for the consolidation of Russian power. The Mongol yoke, 1237 to 1480, fragmented the region, but it also created the conditions for the rise of Moscow, which would eventually lead to the formation of the Russian Empire. By the 15th century, Ivan III, Ivan the Great, began centralizing power and pushing back against Mongol influence. This marked the beginning of territorial consolidation, and under his grandson, Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, Russia embarked on its first major conquests, including the annexation of the Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan. This expansion eastward into Siberia further strengthened Russia's influence and positioned it as a dominant force in the region. The conquest of Siberia would eventually allow Russia to control vast territories rich in natural resources, further fueling its imperial ambitions. The Tsarist expansion under the Romanovs, 17th to 18th century. The Russian Empire, as we understand it, formally began under Tsar Peter the Great in 1721. Peter the Great is often credited with transforming Russia into a major European power, and his reign marked a turning point in the empire's expansion. Peter's desire to modernize Russia and bring it closer to European standards led to the establishment of St. Petersburg as the new capital, symbolizing Russia's shift westward. Peter's military campaigns against Sweden, particularly the Great Northern War, 1700-1721, were crucial in expanding Russian territory and securing Russia's position as a Baltic power. Russia gained control of the strategically important region of the Baltic states, including Estonia, Latvia, and parts of Finland. This expansion allowed Russia to access crucial sea routes, enhancing its naval and commercial capabilities. Catherine the Great, who reigned from 1762 to 1796, continued the expansionist policies of her predecessors. She expanded Russian territory to the Black Sea and into the Ottoman Empire's territories in the south, annexing parts of modern-day Ukraine and Crimea. Her reign also saw Russia's involvement in the partition of Poland, 1772, 1793, 1795, which divided the once independent Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth between Russia, Austria, and Prussia, further increasing Russia's European holdings. The 19th century and peak expansion. During the 19th century, the Russian Empire's territorial expansion reached its zenith. Following the Napoleonic Wars, Russia emerged as one of the dominant European powers, solidifying its control over much of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Under Tsar Nicholas I, 1825 to 1855, Russia expanded into the Caucasus, facing significant resistance from the region's indigenous peoples. The conquest of the Caucasus and its integration into the empire marked a significant achievement, though it was achieved through brutal military campaigns. The empire's expansion into Central Asia was driven by both strategic and economic considerations. Russia's annexation of the Khanates of Khiva, Bukhara, and Kokand in the mid-19th century was motivated by the desire to eliminate potential British influence in the region as part of the ongoing geopolitical struggle known as the Great Game between Russia and Britain. This expansion also gave Russia control over key trade routes and access to valuable resources like cotton, which contributed to its growing industrial base. Russia's presence in the Far East also grew during the 19th century. The acquisition of territories in modern-day Siberia, the Russian Far East, and Manchuria reflected the empire's growing desire to secure access to the Pacific Ocean. The expansion into the Pacific coast of Russia culminated in the establishment of the port city of Vladivostok and the securing of the Amur River basin from China. Colonization of Siberia and Central Asia. The colonization of Siberia and Central Asia was among the most significant aspects of the Russian Empire's territorial expansion. Siberia, with its vast natural resources and strategic position, was a key area of Russian focus from the 16th century onwards. The conquest of Siberia, driven by the Russian Cossacks and their leaders, was relatively swift but devastating for the indigenous peoples. Over the centuries, Russia established a network of settlements and fortresses, and its control over Siberia was formalized through the establishment of the Russian governorates. Central Asia presented a different challenge. While some territories in Central Asia were taken through direct military conquest, others were gradually incorporated through treaties, alliances, and the manipulation of local rulers. The expansion into Central Asia had strategic importance for Russia as it secured its southern borders and served as a counterbalance to British influence in India and Afghanistan. The expansion into the Caucasus. The Caucasus region was another critical area of expansion, which Russia aggressively pursued from the 18th century onwards. The region was historically contested between the Russian, Ottoman, and Persian empires. Catherine the Great's annexation of parts of Georgia and Armenia marked the beginning of Russia's dominance in the region. The Caucasus War, 1870–1864, was a particularly brutal campaign aimed at bringing the indigenous peoples of the Caucasus under Russian control. This conflict, especially the Russian treatment of the Circassian population, remains controversial and is often cited as a genocide due to the scale of displacement, massacres, and forced migrations. The final territorial acquisitions, late 19th, early 20th century. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Russian Empire was at its territorial peak. The empire had become a sprawling landmass, encompassing diverse ethnicities, cultures, and religions. However, the expansion into new territories was increasingly fraught with challenges. The annexation of Finland, Poland, and parts of Manchuria in the late 19th century expanded Russia's holdings, but also strained the empire's resources. As Russian society grew more urbanized and industrialized, the empire faced internal tensions, including labor strikes, peasant uprisings, and growing demands for reform. Russia's involvement in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904–1905, further revealed the empire's vulnerabilities. Despite its vast territorial holdings, Russia was defeated by Japan, which exposed weaknesses in its military and economic systems. This defeat, coupled with the growing unrest within the empire, would eventually lead to the collapse of the Romanov dynasty and the Russian Revolution in 1917. Geopolitical motivations behind territorial expansion. Security and defense considerations. One of the key drivers of Russia's territorial expansion was the constant need for security and defense. The vast expanse of Russia, spanning from Eastern Europe to the Pacific, made it highly vulnerable to external invasions, particularly from Western powers. In the early stages of Russian history, the Mongol invasions of the 13th century left an indelible mark on the psyche of the Russian people and their rulers. The Mongols controlled Russian territories for nearly 2 centuries, and this experience of foreign domination became a crucial factor in the Russian Empire's policies of territorial defense and expansion. The Russians were acutely aware of the potential for invasion from the West, where powerful European states, such as Poland, Sweden, and later France and Germany, were often seen as threats. As a result, the expansion of Russia's borders became a vital strategy to create buffer zones that would protect the heartland of Russia from these external threats. The Caucasus region, Ukraine, and parts of Poland were all considered key areas for expanding Russia's territory to create strategic depth. These territories were strategically important, not only for defense, but also as staging grounds for military operations in the event of conflict with Western powers. Moreover, expanding into the east, including regions such as Siberia, provided additional security by pushing potential enemies further away from the Russian core. The expansionist drive of the Russian Empire also had internal motivations. As the empire grew larger, the need to secure its borders became even more pressing. Russia's vast, sparsely populated territories in the east and south required constant military presence and infrastructure to ensure their integration into the imperial fold. Securing these regions was also essential for maintaining control over the empire's diverse populations, as various ethnic groups, including Turkic, Caucasian, and Mongol peoples, often resisted Russian rule. Strategic interests and control of key routes. Another central motivation for Russia's territorial expansion was the need to control key trade routes and establish military and naval bases. Russia's geography, characterized by vast stretches of land and limited access to the sea, made it dependent on strategic ports and waterways for its economic growth and military power. The acquisition of the Black Sea, for example, was a crucial step in securing Russian interests in Europe and the Mediterranean. The Black Sea was not only important for military defense, but also for trade. By establishing key ports such as Sevastopol, Russia was able to project power into the Mediterranean region, which was a critical area for international commerce, especially as Europe's maritime powers, including the Ottoman Empire and later Britain, competed for dominance in the region. Likewise, the Caspian Sea played a significant role in Russia's expansionist policies. Control over the Caspian allowed Russia to establish dominance over a vital area for oil and natural gas resources, as well as to secure trade routes linking Russia to Central Asia and Persia. It also positioned Russia as a competitor to the British Empire, which was vying for control of India and the Indian Ocean trade routes. Russia's acquisition of the Amur River basin and its establishment of Vladivostok on the Pacific coast represented another important step in securing its foothold in the Far East. By securing the Pacific coast, Russia gained access to the Pacific Ocean, providing opportunities for trade with Asia, especially China and Japan. It also allowed Russia to counterbalance British interests in the region, particularly as Britain extended its influence across Asia. These territorial acquisitions were part of a broader strategy to ensure Russia's access to critical maritime routes and establish a naval presence in the Mediterranean, Black Sea, and Pacific. Russia's ability to control these key strategic locations was crucial for maintaining its status as a global power. At the same time, they allowed Russia to challenge other imperial powers, particularly Britain and France, which had established colonial and naval supremacy in various parts of the world. The quest for economic resources. Economic considerations were deeply intertwined with Russia's expansionist ambitions. The Russian Empire, despite its vast territorial holdings, was heavily reliant on the resources of its conquered territories to fuel its growing industrialization and support its military endeavors. The regions of Siberia, Central Asia, and the Caucasus were rich in natural resources such as timber, minerals, oil, and fertile agricultural land, making them key targets for Russian expansion. These areas, while often sparsely populated and harsh, offered immense wealth and strategic advantages. Siberia in particular became a critical area for resource extraction, and its conquest by the Russian Empire began as early as the 16th century. Siberia's vast expanses of forests, rivers, and minerals were seen as an invaluable asset to the empire. The expansion into Central Asia was similarly driven by the desire to exploit the region's resources, including cotton, grain, and precious metals, which were essential for Russia's economic growth. The integration of these resource-rich territories also allowed Russia to create a more diversified economy that could compete with the rapidly industrializing economies of Western Europe. In addition to the natural resources, controlling trade routes through these regions was essential for facilitating commerce between Russia and other parts of the world. Russia's land empire, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific, allowed it to control overland trade routes that connected the Far East with Europe. These trade routes were vital for transporting goods such as silk, tea, and other commodities from Asia to European markets. Similarly, access to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean allowed Russia to engage in trade with the Middle East and Africa, expanding its economic influence and securing valuable trade partnerships. The desire for prestige and power. The pursuit of prestige and global recognition as a major power was another powerful motivator behind Russia's territorial expansion. Russian rulers, particularly during the reigns of Tsars like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, sought to assert Russia's status as a leading European and global power. As Russia expanded its territory, it also sought to increase its political influence both within Europe and beyond. The acquisition of key territories such as the Black Sea region, the Caucasus, and Poland was seen as vital for securing Russia's place on the world stage. Russian nobility, in particular, was eager to show their dominance over Europe and to project an image of power. The partitions of Poland, for example, were not only an effort to secure Russia's western borders, but also a means of asserting dominance over its neighbors and reasserting control over a historically important region. Similarly, Russia's expansion into the Balkans and the Caucasus was driven in part by a desire to challenge the Ottoman Empire's control over these territories and demonstrate Russia's superiority in the region. The annexation of territories in Central Asia was also a response to the geopolitical competition with Britain. As the British Empire extended its reach across India, Russia sought to secure its own sphere of influence in the region. This was particularly evident in the so-called Great Game, where Russia's expansion into Central Asia was seen as a direct challenge to British interests in the region. Religious and ideological justifications. Religion played a significant role in Russia's territorial expansion. The Russian Orthodox Church, which was deeply entwined with the state, provided both spiritual and ideological justifications for Russia's imperial ambitions. The idea of Russia as the Third Rome was a central element in the Russian Empire's identity. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the Russian Tsars claimed to be the rightful heirs to the Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire and its religious heritage. This idea reinforced Russia's claim to territories inhabited by Orthodox Christians, particularly in the Balkans and the Caucasus. Russian rulers, including Catherine the Great, justified their expansion into these regions by portraying themselves as protectors of Orthodox Christians who were under the rule of the Ottoman Empire and later Persia. By integrating these Orthodox Christian communities into the Russian Empire, the Tsars framed their imperial conquests as part of a divine mission to spread Christianity and protect fellow Christians from the oppression of non-Orthodox rulers. This religious rhetoric played a crucial role in legitimizing Russian imperialism, especially among the Russian populace and the Orthodox clergy. The ideological justification for Russian expansion was also linked to a broader sense of Russian nationalism and the idea that the Russian Empire was destined to rule over vast lands and diverse peoples. The Russian state, through its control of large territories, sought to unite diverse ethnic groups under a common Russian identity, often through the imposition of Russian language, culture, and governance. The impact of the Great Game. The Great Game was a defining element of Russian expansion in Central Asia during the 19th century. As Britain sought to expand its influence in India, Russia sought to counter British dominance by extending its reach into Central Asia and Persia. This geopolitical rivalry between the two empires, characterized by espionage, diplomatic maneuvering, and military confrontations, fueled much of Russia's territorial expansion in the region. Russia's victory over Persia in the early 19th century allowed it to establish a strong presence in the Caspian Sea and solidify its control over key trade routes. Russia's victory in the Caucasus and its subsequent territorial acquisitions in Central Asia, including the annexation of the Khanates of Khiva, Bukhara, and Kokand, were part of its strategy to block British access to the region and limit British influence in Asia. By the late 19th century, Russia had effectively secured its dominance in Central Asia, creating a vast buffer zone between its empire and British-controlled India. Russian nationalism and ethnic assimilation. Nationalism played a pivotal role in shaping Russia's territorial ambitions. The expansion of the Russian Empire was not merely a matter of political or military conquest. It was also an effort to assimilate and integrate diverse ethnic and cultural groups into a single Russian identity. Russian rulers sought to extend Russian language, culture and governance across the empire, often displacing indigenous populations in the process. Russian settlers were encouraged to migrate to newly acquired territories, particularly in Siberia and Central Asia, where they established new towns, villages, and agricultural settlements. This process of ethnic assimilation often involved the forcible relocation of indigenous populations and the imposition of Russian customs and practices. Indigenous peoples were often expected to adopt Russian language and culture, and in some cases, entire communities were relocated to make way for Russian settlers. Such the pursuit of a warm-water port. The quest for warm-water ports was a long-standing objective of Russian imperial policy. Russia's harsh winters and the freezing of its northern ports made it reliant on ports that remained open year-round. The conquest of the Black Sea was a critical part of this strategy, as it provided Russia with access to the Mediterranean and the ability to project military and naval power into southern Europe. Similarly, the acquisition of Vladivostok on the Pacific coast was crucial for securing Russia's presence in East Asia and facilitating trade with China and Japan. Conclusion. Russia's territorial expansion was driven by a complex set of motivations, including security concerns, economic needs, geopolitical strategy, and ideological beliefs. While the expansion allowed Russia to build one of the largest empires in history, it also left a legacy of conquest, cultural assimilation, and conflict. The imperial ambitions of Russia shaped not only the history of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, but also the course of global geopolitics. Understanding the drivers behind Russia's territorial expansion provides critical insight into the broader processes of imperialism, nationalism, and geopolitical rivalry that defined the 19th and early 20th centuries.